Okay, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant, all right? I'm going to take you with me. But it's very frustrating to me as a special education civil rights attorney that I deal with government 100% of the time, guys. Various arms of government, legislative, local, state, federal, police, DHR, uh, district attorneys, the juvenile court system, mainly public schools, okay? Mainly public schools. But at the same time, like I said, there's just sort of this interconnectedness in having to sit there and solve various problems through those different arms. And so that's what I do. But I can tell you, in the almost 14 years of doing this, the biggest frustrating thing is being hamstrung on my end, being that I'm a private attorney exposed in this world to where I have to do a good job. I have to sit there and follow a set of rules, a set of ethics, my own moral code, uh, um, you know, because I don't have the benefit of immunity that government people get. And I've got fairly broad immunity, meaning that you can't sue them. They can sit there and screw up. They can damage your life to a large extent, guys. They can sit there and take your money and go, oops, fine you. They can surcharge you to death. They can arrest you. And there's so many things they can do. Take your kids away. DHR. Oops. Well, yeah, we had to investigate we had to take everything serious. Isn't that the biggest excuse? And I love what Hannah Arendt, she coined the phrase, the banality of evil, which of course she got from her psychological interviews and her studies of a lot of the Nazis that weren't in the upper echelon. They were these second or tier, third, fourth tier people that were doing some heinous things for the people on the top. And you sit there and you go, why? Why is it, if you knew all these things were going on, why were you doing it? And the reason she called it the banality of evil, and if you don't know what banality is, or banal, then guys, Google it. Okay, Banality, and you'll understand that it just sort of is this just this lackluster, just whatever type of attitude toward evil. And that's an unfortunate way of looking at evil. But when you're so, I guess, accustomed to it, or I guess you're just so immune because you're just inundated with it, then it just becomes an everyday occurrence in the decision-making process, even though you yourself think you're good, and you yourself can sit there and justify whatever decision you're making. You can sit there and go, well, and this is where Hannah Arendt came up with it, is that so many of these guys that she talked to that were doing some very horrible things during World War II, genocide, for example, a lot of them would just sit there and say, I was just following orders. I was doing my job. And I tell you, so many times, that's the part that really bothers me about what I do. Because I talk to people, and I'm not saying that they're out there committing genocide, school people. I'm making an observation based upon Hannah Arendt and, what she coined as banality of evil, okay? But that doesn't mean that on a smaller scale, within some of our public schools and within some of our other government institutions, that the banality isn't there of evil. It's just routine. And it's justified that, I was just doing my job. Yeah, I've got to feed my family too. And, if I took a moral stand against, these things, damn straight you need to take a moral stand. Because otherwise you have no morality. And so it's confusing to me because I don't. Now, I have the luxury of working at the Galini Group, and my name happens to be James Galini. So, yes, I have the benefit of establishing what my moral principles are and what the moral principles are for my firm. And by God, they're followed. And that stuff's intolerable. But by working within government, to sit there and say, well, I'm just doing my job. I knew it wasn't right. I don't know how you sleep at night, guys. Some of you. So I saw this article, and that's sort of the point of what I was getting to today. I saw this article out of Mississippi, and I saw the story when it came across, but this article pissed me off because I'll explain why. Okay, you saw the preschool there in Hamilton where the daycare employees were charged. Well, they dressed up in Halloween masks for these preschoolers, and they were running around scaring the hell out of these preschoolers. And you could see in one of the images, one of the masks. And, of course, these clowns decided to record it. And, because they thought it was funny watching these kids in terror, these babies in this preschool. Now, you sit there and you go, okay, that was wrong. And, damn straight they were arrested. Okay. See, here's where we're getting to my point. This is a private preschool, not a government preschool. And so what did they do? Of course, the sheriff's department picked their asses up, charged them with 3 counts of felony child abuse, 4 of them, 3 counts of felony child abuse. One of them, failure to report the abuse because she was a mandatory reporter. All right? Failure to report because she was a mandatory reporter. And that's a misdemeanor. And then also simple assault. And I don't know what the simple assault was. So she didn't have the mask on. She didn't participate, but they still got her. Why? Because she was a mandatory reporter. She saw what they were doing. She had a duty to report. Now, mandatory reporters, what I've been finding out lately in my career is that paraprofessionals and teachers and administrators, they're trained and they're they're like, oh, I'm a mandatory reporter, James, so I report on everything I see, except what goes on inside the school. They don't report on that. And I found in one of my cases that they weren't trained that they were to report on themselves or report on their other employees or report on their school. What I have found in my discussions with paras is that they're told to keep that in-house, that it needs to be taken to their administrators, and their administrators will investigate and determine whether it meets that standard to then be reported. And then what ends up happening in almost every, I haven't seen one that hasn't turned out this way. So I'm going to say all of them because in my 14 years of experience, I haven't seen a school report on itself until after the fact, after they were busted. Because what ends up happening is you have some employees that they do have a conscience and they sit there and they go, hey, this is what I'm seeing. And they report to DHR. Or they report to CPS. Now, most of them will follow that chain of command, talk to their principal or assistant principal, and then you don't hear anything else about it. This thing's shoved under the carpet. It's not being investigated. They're sure as hell not following the proper chain of mandatory reporting, because there's no rule within mandatory reporting that says that you go through your own administrative staff first, before reporting it to the proper institution. And that's DHR's job. It's not a principal's job to sit there and make a determination on whether or not one of their staff members are committing abuse, neglect. It's not their job. They'll so easily report on parents, on suspicions, gross suspicions, little suspicions. And sometimes they're targeted on purpose because they know that there is no accountability if they're wrong. There's no punishment if they're targeting parents and they know damn well that those claims were false. They just do it because it's a mechanism of control. It's part of the banality of evil, and they'll do it. But they won't report on themselves, by God. So I have a case involving multiple kids in a location. I'm not going to give you the state. I'm not going to give you the city. But there was a para that witnessed that and reported on it, and had even reported the school year prior, on some things that she had seen at a different school, but had reported up the chain. Nothing was done about it. So at the start of this past school year, she witnessed things, absolutely witnessed things, multiple things, along with a couple of other paraprofessionals that was going on inside this self-contained classroom. And I'm not going to say what those things were, because, we're working through the corrective action with the school. And my problem with this particular situation isn't necessarily the school system itself or the administration, because other than I think that the principal and one of the special education administrators, not the special ed director, one of the special ed administrators, I think that they made serious, gross missteps early on. I think that once higher up administrators found out, there was some quick movement to get rid of these two offenders that were employed inside this classroom. Unfortunately, they let them resign instead of firing them, which, okay, hindsight's 2020. But I can tell you that the school system, or there was also a paid investigative report to look into these allegations. And guys, they were verified. They were verified that this stuff happened. Now, the unfortunate thing is because of how some of this stuff was handled in the beginning. There's a lot of I think there was a lot of teachers within this particular school system that backed the ones that got let go. And they shouldn't have done that, because you don't have a clue what went on. You weren't there, and this thing hasn't been publicized. And so to sit there and throw your support behind the accused, it's not smart. You weren't there. And the other thing is, I will tell you that I think that there are also some cultural things embedded in this district that they're now trying to get rid of. I have high respect for the current special ed director, and believe that there's, and also the superintendent, I think that there's an attitude to sit there and undo some of this, what I consider cultural toxicity within this school that was more reinforced and inserted in by prior administration, by prior administrators that are no longer there. But that residual yuck just sort of seems to permeate still. And it takes a little bit of time for the new people to open the windows and disinfect the place. Because unfortunately, if you're trained a certain way, and then you do it that way, and you don't realize that it's not smart to do it that way, and these are abusive and negative ways to interact and handle vulnerable populations. You'd sit there and you think that common sense would come in on some of this stuff. For example, the use of a spray water bottle. That's spraying it in the face of these children as a punitive measure for vocalizations, let's say autistic vocalizations. I'm saying, having pictures, guys, I have pictures of water bottle sitting right there by the kid, taken by the aide that was a witness to all of this stuff, that did end up reporting it. To where, if one of my clients had vocalized autistic vocalizations, that she'd get sprayed in the face. Now, this is the thing. Who taught them that? Where did that training come from? Because I just don't think people sit there and go, you know what, I'm going to take a water bottle and I'm just going to fill it up and I'm going to spray it in the... That's something, it's called an aversive, and that's something that I think they used to do back in the 70s, in the 80s. And there's still some back-ass school districts that I still see that, but I see it less and less and less than I had when I first started practicing this area. I was rather shocked to see that it was being done in this particular school because of how highly rated this particular school is. It's a very good school. Very bad classroom as far as how things were happening there. But what is extremely frustrating to me is that in this particular situation, for this private daycare, the sheriff's department investigated and picked these people up, and they charged them with felony child abuse. Now, what I also found interesting is that if you go further down, issued warrants, okay, within 2 hours of receiving the warrants, all 5 suspects were in custody in the jail. And the 4 suspects on felony charges had an initial appearance, and their bonds were set. And so you had $20,000 in bond, and the other ones were $15,000. Okay. What now? The felony charges will be presented to the next grand jury, and it will be decided if there is enough evidence to indict these individuals on these charges. As I've stayed in the picture on this particular case longer than needed, frankly. But the reason I did, in part, was there's a lot of moving parts to try to resolve the case. But at the same time, I knew that if I rushed through and really got it done, that the other government institutions weren't going to do anything. And they didn't. Because there was a half-assed police investigation on the front end. It's horrible. I wouldn't even call it a true investigation. Don't know why. Still don't know why. I had sort of forgotten about, and then there was, that independent investigation, and that report was handed over to the police and to the district attorney. In fact, there was a meeting where that was presented to these institutions. And by the way, DHR, like I said, I don't really think the school did that much wrong, other than they worked very quickly to correct the wrongs, their wrongs. So I can't sit there and go, well, the school. Well, I'm not including the school. I think the school has gone over and above to correct those problems at the beginning. My criticism is with the police and the district attorney's office and DHR. Pathetic. And the district attorney. Just pathetic. Putrid. Pathetic. DHR didn't do anything. The school did turn around and report over. Didn't do anything. There was a call to a couple parents. Nothing. These kids were scared with masks, guys. They were scared with masks. Okay? I'm not to sit there and downplaying that. Not at all. But if I went into detail about not one thing, but about 5 or 6 things over the course of weeks before these people were busted, that having a kid myself that has an inability to communicate and tell me how her day went, where so much of my trust as a parent is handed over to these people at the school, that they're going to care for her and they're going to love her and they're going to protect her. And they're going to treat her like a human. And you sit there and you say, why? Why mention that? Well, guys, unless you live a day in our shoes, those of us who have kids that are extremely vulnerable, that can come with behaviors that have a lack of ability to traditionally communicate, it's a different scenario. It's a different kind of trust, because you have children that you're handing over to people who they don't belong to them. And it's frustrating for us as parents when, our children have meltdowns. And of course, you don't want your child to bite or to pinch or to slap or to hit or anything like that. No parent wants that for themselves or anybody else. But when you have a lack of means of communication, then of course, everything becomes a form of communication, including behavior, especially behavior. I mean, think about Helen Keller, guys, before she was given those tools from Anne Sullivan. She was like a feral child. And our kids spend the majority of their year inside of our government institution called school. Most of their time inside of these classes within that government institution known as self-contained classrooms. And in a lot of these self-contained classrooms, guys, they have rooms inside of those rooms that are either padded or they're just closets. And in this particular school, the light switch is on the outside. And the door locked, guys. The door locked. There was no knob on the inside. So once it was shut, whoever was shut in there couldn't get out, guys. Not on their own. Because there was no doorknob. Not only that is, it had a locking mechanism on the outside. Now you sit there and you say, how is that legal? It's not legal. Not in Alabama. If you have a timeout or a quiet room, they have to exist in common areas. Common areas are in hallways where people are in. Why? It's a protective mechanism. It's a safety mechanism so that things like this don't occur, to where we're not throwing kids, that are around other kids that can't communicate. Who is there to protect them? You think that these other kids don't see what's happening to their peers? Because my daughter sees everything, guys. She's not dumb. And she can feel people's energy, and she can feel their positivity or their negativity. And there's so many times where some of the staff in these self-contained environments just speak so callously, like these kids don't understand them. As though just because they can't verbalize English, they don't understand what's being said about them. And sometimes it's horrible things, because I have parents that have recorded inside their classrooms and they've handed it over to me. And nobody's protecting them. I try, but within the parameters of the allowances that are there. Because there's a few things I don't have any control over. I can't control that they're given immunity. And you sit there and you say, immunity from this stuff even? Well, you would think no. But what would need to end up lining up in order to have a legitimate challenge to their immunity is it would have helped if they were fired instead of allowed to resign. It would have helped if they were charged with a crime that they pled out to, or they were found guilty. But because none of that exists, and it's artificial why it exists. It's not that there weren't valid reasons. It's not that there wasn't, in my viewpoint, confirmations of guilty actions. But because the institutions didn't do their job, there's no accountability. And these two yahoos are employed in a neighboring school district, and the parents are none the wiser, have no idea. But yet in Mississippi, they'll pull these people up, they'll arrest them, they'll get a judge to get a warrant. They picked them up, they charged them, had them sit in jail for a little bit, set a bond, and then they're taking it to the grand jury. And with this situation, guys, they slow walk this. The DA and the police were caught in so many lies. They were dumb enough to put a lot of this stuff in writing with some of the parents. Dumb enough to where, I'm not saying that there's like some legal case that can be made against them for their lies and their half-truths. And I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is make a pretty damn good and interesting, juicy investigative report about how they don't care about the vulnerable in their county, because there's absolutely no reason why they didn't take action. And a lot of it was behind these lies of, presenting it to a grand jury. Well, if you want to indict a ham sandwich with a grand jury, you can do it. It's a one-sided thing with a prosecutor arguing in front of a grand jury. And if they want to, they can be very persuasive because there's not an opposition to provide a defense. You're just presenting what you have, and how you present it is critical. I'm not dumb. But they didn't want to do that. And you see, misdemeanors in Alabama is 12 months. And these people slow walked this and didn't do anything and made excuses and oh, you need to go see this person. Over there, we can't do arrest warrants. Oh, we can't do this. We can't do that. We can't do this. This person does this. Oh, well, no, this person does it. And then you go back to that person there like, no, that person does it. It was all lies. It was all lies and deceptions and half-truths. But why? Don't these kids matter? Don't these kids matter? I think it's a measure, it's a testament in a society what you do with the most vulnerable among us. And if the excuse is, well, they're not really human. And that's where I felt like a lot of this was going. It's that they just dehumanized them as much as the offenders. In fact, worse. Inaction by itself, guys, can be more damaging than the abuse and the neglect. Because some of this stuff, you can sit there and say, well, they lost their cool. Those of you in government institution jobs that had a responsibility to prosecute. That's intentional. That kind of damage is intentional. But why? For what reason? What end? Who were you protecting and what were you protecting? Because in this situation, they were picked up for 3 counts of felony child abuse for wearing masks. For wearing masks. They even charged the person for not following their mandatory reporting responsibilities. which could have happened in this situation too, because there were multiple aides that didn't immediately back the first aide, who was a witness. Well, there were more than one. But some of the other aides were scared, and they didn't initially back these two in what they had witnessed. That started eking out later. There were witnesses to this. None of these people were picked up. Not in the case of, they were in Mississippi though. They were in Mississippi. It's so frustrating doing what I do sometimes because, as much change that I can bring and it's within these parameters of allowances that government permits, because government does not permit you to sue it unless it gives you permission. Now, there's constitutional violations, and yes, I said in the very beginning, I could sit there and throw complaints in all day long. But whether those complaints can see the light of day is contingent and dependent upon all these other factors. Otherwise, it's destroyed because government in Montgomery gave these people immunity. So I've got to sit there and overcome this immunity. But how do you overcome immunity if the components, the necessary components to show that their behavior was willful and wanton, that it was a total disregard? These things weren't done. Well, whose job is that? It's not my job. That job rests in your police, in DHR, and a district attorney that cares. And this one didn't. Cared about the institutions. That's what cared about. Sad. Things need to change. And I'd sit there and give you some direction on how, but I don't believe Alabama is such a pro-police state, that I don't see it putting any restrictions on itself. I see it doing nothing but enhancing the protection of people that work within government. That's what I've seen. I don't see them slapping hands of people within institutions and saying, do your damn job. The parents have even reached out to the Attorney General's office, and I find, them playing games with the parents just as much as the county DA and everybody else. So to sit there and go, keep going up the chain. It's smoking crack, guys. Some of these states are and that's one of the reasons. Well, I'm not going to tell you why. I find the government in Alabama just as oppressive and damaging as I find the New Mexico government with their crazy government and their supermajority. One's a supermajority Democrat state and one's a supermajority Republican state. And I think that they behave exactly the same. Tyrannical, abusive, oppressive. I love the people in both states. Find their governments absolutely intolerable because of how they choose to act and how they choose to govern. And I find it destructive. But what could you do? You could do legislation to sit there and try to chip away at this broad government immunity that these people have inside schools. I don't think that they need it. Why? The other thing is that there should be consequences for not prosecuting against people that work inside government institutions, that when there's findings of neglect and abuse. And I'm talking about findings meaning suspicions. I'm not talking about a determination of guilt, guys. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty. But as you saw in this situation, didn't prevent the police from charging them, didn't prevent them from pulling their asses into court or into jail initially, and then having them stand in front of a judge for a bond hearing. You notice that last step? Now they're going to take it to the grand jury. But it didn't keep the police from taking action. Didn't keep the DA from taking action initially. Didn't take a judge. They all took initial action based upon their finding Now it's time to determine guilt. Okay, that's my rant. We need to be better. But I think we as a people are. The government is, the government.